Hi, everyone. My name is Shanna Groves. I am the host of the Definitely Talking podcast. I'm also known as Lip Reading Mom, and I am the creator of the Lip Reading Mom blog. I'm so excited to welcome our guest, our very first guest of the year 2026. Her name is Kellina Powell. Let me tell you a little bit about Kellina. She is a deaf coach and international speaker. She's also a four-time best-selling author. She empowers young adults with disabilities to break barriers and achieve goals. She's a leading advocate for disability inclusion and mental health. She has spoken on over 200 podcasts and earned recognition as one of Canada's top 100 Black women to watch in 2025. Through her work, Kellina continues to educate, inspire, and amplify the voices of the deaf and disability communities worldwide. Hello, Kellina.
Hello, thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. So, you are our very first guest who lives in Canada. And I know those of us who live in the lower states, we are usually talking about things that are happening in our country, but I think it's really great to also get the perspective of other countries and a global perspective when it comes to disability, hearing loss, and deafness. So you are our first non-US guest, which I'm so excited. Wow. All right. So today, Kellina, can you start us off by sharing some of your background with having a hearing loss?
Yeah, for sure. So I actually lost my hearing loss at the age of 4 due to an infection, and my life turned completely upside down. Both of my parents decided to put me into a deaf school and a hearing school to help me to communicate very well with both communities. Just because my mom had me at a very young age, she was very confused what to do. And thankfully, I had a great grandmother, nurse, and she knew exactly what to do with me when I became deaf at 4. And so, yeah, so that's basically how I actually became deaf at the age of 4.
Wow, 4 years old. So, do you have any prior memory before age 4 about not having hearing loss? I'm curious.
Yeah, so the same day, so I would walk from home from daycare, and I was in front of the TV, watching TV, and I noticed something was different. My mom tapped me on the shoulder, and I jumped. And when I tell everybody, when I jump, I jump. And I was like, and I looked at my mom so confused, and I asked her, Mom, I can't hear you. My mom said, Wait, what? You were hearing me a few minutes ago. And that's when my mom took the phone, called my grandmother. My grandmother rushed home from the hospital. She did some tools on my ears, and my grandmother said, "Okay, she cannot hear me, and she's not responding." And so then from then, my my family calls my family doctor, unfortunately, and my family doctor said, you can come in tomorrow to get her ear checked. And so when that happened, my family doctor broke the news to my family and said, I'm so sorry, there's nothing we can do. Kellina is completely deaf. So that's what happened.
Wow. Wow. So interesting. This from a young age, and also that you had the experience of going to a deaf school as part of your education. Can you elaborate a little bit more on your experiences in attending a deaf school?
Yeah, it was just an amazing school ever. I actually learned my sign language. I felt more comfortable versus going to the hearing school. It was very, very different. It was very hard. I didn't know what to do, unfortunately. And I realized when I learned how to communicate differently with two different people or two different communities, I learned that not everybody could accommodate me. And so I felt like part of my was ripped apart because of the hearing school, and I was not able to advocate for myself compared to the deaf school. So the deaf school really taught me what my accommodation are, especially as someone who's so young. How can you tell a 4-year-old what your accommodation are? So in the deaf school, it's very good experience, but the hearing school, not so much. So it's very difficult for me to navigate in two different communities at the time.
I'm sure. You're almost like, what do they call it? Code switching. You're going from being a part of a deaf culture and community to trying to assimilate in a hearing classroom. That that would be something I know that not everyone can relate to, but I think it is very important to point out that there are different ways to learn and be educated. There's not just a one size fits all either. And so, do you have any perspective? I know, and you mentioned accommodations, and that you work also in your advocacy to help people understand what their rights are as not only a person with hearing loss or deafness, but people in the disability community. And you also, when we shared at the beginning of our podcast, that you have uh, an interest and accessibility background also with mental health awareness. And I'm curious to know, with it being wintertime, and a lot of us with the seasonal affective disorder, we sometimes do need to focus more on our mental health during these winter months. What are some things that you've learned from your advocacy work in the disability community, not only when it comes to mental health, but just advocating for yourself?
I noticed that, there's a long wait list, especially for programs. I know sometimes we want to get support and help with resources, but there's not enough space available, and there's a long wait list. Sometimes people can't access to those type of resources that they wish or hope to get into. And number two is that I realized that it's very difficult to really talk to a professional, right? Sometimes you want to talk to someone who can relate to us. And there's not a lot of them out there no more. Because before, you actually have a day very rare to find them. And I noticed for myself when I was growing up, I always go online to look for a hard of hearing counselor who can support my mental health. And there was none in Canada for me. However, there were some in the United States. And it's very hard, it's very limited when you are really trying to get yourself out there, but you know that a lot of people are not capable of accommodating you. And I noticed that a lot of people slack education because they are not willing to learn how to accommodate. And even for myself, like I do get rejected sometimes because of accommodation need, especially when I was growing up, even in business as well, right? And so I learned that not everybody's willing to take the time to learn and be patient with other people, especially the disability community, really learning what their needs are. And I noticed that they assume so much. And so people think that you accommodate with one person, they think it's the same thing with another person, where that's not the case. And so some people just think like just because. And I was like, whoa, like you need to be educated more on how everybody think. And everybody accommodation is different. So it's a matter of people really being patient with each other. And number two, continue educating themselves about accommodation. Because things change, policy is the biggest thing now, where some of us are not able to get access to things we need because of the policy changes. And some policy is not acceptable all the time. And that's what I noticed. It's like, how come this policy said this, but the other company policy said this? So I noticed that some policies really prevent some of us to move forward. And that's what I noticed in a lot in my advocacy work.
Sure, sure. The inconsistencies, I think, in the accommodations process and company to company can be enormous from your experience, it sounds like, and as well as mine as well. And also getting access to mental health, not only just standardize whatever you want to call mental health counseling or, any type of access to those resources, but you also have to consider that our mental health needs as people with deafness and hearing loss can vary but also be very different from someone with typical hearing or someone with another disability because ours impacts communication. And we need to have a counselor who can accommodate our communication needs as well. I don't know about you, but I've been in some counseling virtual calls to where there is no captioning. And so I have to use my phone or something that has a captioning device on it to be able to understand what a counselor is saying to me. And I think if more of us speak out about the need for captioning for virtual counseling calls or for in person calls, asking your client, I understand that you have some accommodation needs. Could you please elaborate more on that? Maybe making that a part of the standard interview process when you go to get counseling. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, this happens all the time to me, not just you. I think a lot of us can relate with that, right? And so I noticed that I remember one time I was doing a podcast and they were using it on a different platform. And I was really confused. I was like, oh, I can't follow up. And I was like, oh, can we use a different platform? And they're like, well, I prefer this platform. And I was like, but you were aware that I'm a hard of hearing person. I literally put in my bio. You didn't ask for my accommodation. You didn't even take the knowledge to read my bio, at least. And so for me, it's that I always tell everybody if someone cannot accommodate you one time, please dismiss yourself because it's not worth the stress or headache to even fight with that person if they're not willing to accommodate you. And I know that sometimes we say, no, what, forget it. And we're used to that saying that. But the thing is, social media changed, technology changed so much. A lot of technology now have closed caption,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not had been upgraded yet. But I learned that not everybody is meant to accommodate you. Not everybody's meant for you. You will meet someone that will be meant for you and who will take the time to accommodate you. And that's something I learned. And it's very unfortunate that some people can be very ignorant and some people just don't know what to do and they are nervous to act. And that's what I noticed is that people are shy to ask questions. And I said, you can ask me questions, right? And they're like, well, I don't want to sound dumb or I don't want to sound intimidated. And I always tell everybody, don't feel intimidated for anything you do. Like, don't feel bad at all.
There is no question asked that is ignorant as compared to the questions you don't ask that need to be asked. That's kind of a tongue twister, but yeah, every question, I think, especially when it comes to our needs and clarification on communication, has a purpose in giving us access to whatever it is we need, whether it be information from a counseling session or information in a face to face meeting or virtual meeting at work. That we need access is the big one. And I know that you've worked really hard on that with your advocacy work. And oh my goodness, being recognized in Canada for all of your work too. Where in Canada are you located?
And so I'm actually in Toronto, everybody. So yeah.
Wonderful. So, Ontario. And do you find that, you've done probably research on other countries, working Canada, you mentioned the United States, that the disability communities, are they similar from your experiences and how they advocate and how they communicate, or do they vary?
I would say it's varies. From my experience, I can't speak on behalf of everybody in Canada or United States. But from my experience, I know that the United States are more open-minded compared to Canadians. I feel like Canadians had a lot of work to do versus the US. So I feel like the US is more an event than Canada. Um, I think that's what I would say. But I love both countries. There's no difference between the two. Um, yeah, I think. The United States, I feel like they have more resources than Canadian does. I would say yes, they do have more resources than Canadian because there's a lot more deaf schools in United States compared to Canada. Canada don't really have a lot of deaf schools in the United States compared to here. It's very rare. Usually, if they the only thing I know is that with both Canada and United States deaf schools, they're all far from home. That's what I noticed. They're all far from home, especially child's hometown. They're all far. They're like an hour and a half away or 2 hours away. So it's very unfortunate. But that's my takeaway on that.
When you attended deaf school, did you have to live in a residential facility or were you transported by bus or by your family?
So I had to take the school bus. I didn't live on the deaf school.
And how far away were you from your school?
Not far. I think I was like 30 minutes away. Um, I think I was 30 minutes from the deaf school. It was a little far though, to be honest.
I know. I think we're spoiled sometimes in these metropolitan areas and where I live in the United States. I live in the Kansas City area, and the Kansas School for the Deaf is 5 miles from my house. I drive by it all the time. It's so spoiled to think that not everyone has that access to that communication, which is really, I think, something that is eye opening when we think about children, young children growing up with deafness who need access to these resources. Maybe their home schools aren't able to provide, their families aren't able to provide. The School for the Deaf is it. And I want to ask you one final question. This is a fun question. Hopefully it'll be fun for you too. What?
Okay.
Okay, this is the final question of every podcast interview that I do on Definitely Talking. And that question is, Kellina, what is your superpower? What do you think that you are good at or have skills at that we have not discussed today?
I would say my superpower is my smile, because a lot of people drawn to my smile. And I guess because I'm always an uplifting girl, and my smile gives somebody the spark, like, oh, I want to talk to this girl. She's full of energy because of my smile. And I love smiling all the time. I'm never angry, um, unless you push my button. That's it. But I love smiling to people and I love making people feel welcome. And I love making people feel like they are being heard and seen when I have a conversation with them. So that would be my superpower skills I have.
Wow. That is something that now that you mentioned smile, I'm smiling just thinking about your smile. And I think your smile is, for lack of a better word, contagious for those of us who maybe just need a little bit more light and joy in our day. So, well, thank you, Kellina, very much for being a part of this podcast. You have been a wonderful person to get to know, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I'm excited to be back, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed this podcast and we'll see you
Yes.
soon.
And on behalf of Definitely Talking, I want to wish you all very well in this new year, good health, and many blessings and a sense of community, because you will find it here with us on this podcast. We are very open and inclusive of you. Thank you for taking the time to watch and listen. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.